אנחנו, מיד אני אגיד כמה דברי ברכה. רבע שעה הראשונה תוקדש לטקס השקת הכנס הזה. כמה מילים על האורח וכמה מילים על המארחים. אחר כך אנחנו נשמע את דוקטור קרנברג בהרצאה ואת פרופסור בלאס שתנחה את הפאנל הראשון שימשך עד השעה 7:45. תהיה לנו רבע שעה הפסקה. רבע שעה הפסקה זה לא הרבה לנאספים כה רבים, אז אנא, אנחנו רוצים מאוד לשמור על הזמנים. אחר כך יהיה לנו פאנל שיעסוק בחומר קליני כפי שפרסמנו בלוח הזמנים. I will now talk few minutes in English. I'm both excited and happy to open this conference with our guest, Dr. Kernberg, and welcome you and your wife, Katerina Haran, who is accompanying you. So, welcome to Israel. Can you hear me, Dr. Kernberg? Can you hear me? So I was just saying welcome to Israel. To say a few personal words, your signature, which adorns my psychoanalyst certificate, has been hanging on the walls of my clinic as a source of pride for many years. And truth to be told, I didn't think that I will have the opportunity to see you and host you in such an event. The conference has a short history. We first discussed the possibility of your coming here in Boston at the international meeting of the IPA conference when I was still the president of the Israeli Society. The idea became a reality thanks to a meeting between Boaz Gesthalter, board member of Triast-Saric Institute, and one of your colleagues, Dr. Frank Yeomans in New York, and we are very happy about it and very glad that you could come and visit us and be presenting your ideas here. I wanted to say a few words about our guest as well as about the hosts, the Triast-Saric Institute and the Wynikote Center, before clearing the stage for the truly important issues. But I believe that the hundreds of Israel mental health professionals who are crowding this Bar Shira auditorium tonight are 1,000 witnesses attending to the fact that Dr. Kernberg needs no introduction. Can you hear? Can you hear? Yeah. Moreover, Professor Bלאס, who will chair the present panel, will do so right away and more elaborately, but one cannot make do with nothing at all. So I will therefore say only this. Dr. Kernberg is probably between the most influential psychoanalysts of our generation. I think it is safe to say that an entire generation of case presentation is marked by the interest his writing has evoked in the subject of the borderline patient. His contribution goes far beyond the criteria he developed for describing the diagnosing of the borderline personality disorder. It would be more accurate to say that throughout his many fruitful years of work, Dr. Kernberg has put himself on the boundary space, so to speak, both clinically, by making the required adaptation to psychoanalytic technique in order to facilitate work with patients that early psychoanalysis deemed beyond its capabilities, and much more than that, theoretically, by building bridges between Kleinian thinking and American ego psychology and by enriching both these traditions with the contribution of French psychoanalysis, André Green, for example, without at any point foregoing his extensive erudition and the depth of the thinking. Sitting together with the other planners and producers of this event, we thought that whatever subject Dr. Kernberg chose for the lecture today, it would be fascinating to hear Kernberg discussing Kernberg Today. And this is more or less what we will hear. With your permission, I will allow myself another word about the host of this event. The Triast-Sarigue Institute, which together with the Wynnicott Center, directed by Michal Rick and Dr. Meir Steinbock, both training analysts in the Israel Psychoanalytic Society, made all this happen. The Triast-Sarigue Institute was founded in 1985 by my partner, Triast-Sarigue, and myself, and is now celebrating its 32nd birthday. All those years, Triast-Sarigue and I are working side by side, somehow surviving each other and continuing to do the work for better and for worse. We would like to believe that this conference is part of our 30th anniversary. Why we are celebrating the 30th anniversary at the age of 32? Well, because no one has time for celebration with the trials of everyday's life. The Institute was founded in order to enable combined treatment, טיפול משולב, simultaneous individual and group therapies, and has since developed into a multidisciplinary center that offers community psychotherapy and mental health services to various populations and sectors of Israeli society. The clinic offers nowadays individual psychotherapy, work with children in boarding schools, and diagnosing services in the difficult and thankless field of parental competence and legal decisions. It is a good time to mention that Dr. Kernberg's writing span many areas that interface with this kind of work, namely groups, organizations, and social processes. The Triast-Sarigue Institute is proud to have trained many generations of clinical psychology candidates who have successfully completed their internship in our institute, and today the institute has something like 60 therapists at different stages of their professional training and staff whose composition is representative of the pluralistic fabric of Israeli society. It is only thanks to the devoted efforts of the director, Eyal Komornik, and the management, including Tami Nir, our chief clinical psychologist, Yael Zohar, head of the children department, Boaz Gesthalter, who is in charge of the diagnosis, and the institute's supervisors who are qualified to supervise our therapists and interns, that we have been able to meet all kinds of professional challenges and survive the taxing financial and administrative constraints of running a private institute that offers in-depth psychodynamic internship, and that has been operating all these years without any scholarships or government support, when most of its position holders are working practically as volunteers. This is an opportunity to thank each and every one of you, and I wish to add special thanks to Ruti Ben-Efrat, who will present in the second part of the evening a case study that we will discuss together. All the mentioned above, together with Meir Steinbock and Michal Rick and Rachel Blas, have been staying awake at night to make this conference a reality, but all these efforts would not have been enough if it wasn't for the dedicated labors of Ziva Isikovic, our office manager, and all her talented violinist daughter, who was her right hand in handling, registering, and organizing the hundreds of submissions we have received. I'm grateful to you all, and I'm very happy to welcome you all here. I now will invite Dr. Meir Steinbock to briefly present the Wynnicott Center, and then we can begin.
טוב, שלום לכולם. ראשית אני רוצה להודות תודה גדולה לפרופסור אוטו קרנברג ולומר שאני לא מוצא מילים כדי להביע את השמחה וההתרגשות שאני חש לנוכח המפגש איתו. בדיבור בצוות אמרנו מאושיות הפסיכואנליזה, וזה אכן כך. אני רוצה לאחל לו ולאשתו שמבקרת לראשונה בישראל המשך שהות מהנה וטובה. מכיוון שבלי שידענו את זה קודם, מדובר למעשה בחגיגת יום ההולדת ה-32 של מכון טריאסט-שריג, אז דבר ראשון אני רוצה להודות לכם יוסי, אירית ואייל שהזמנתם אותנו למסיבה, ולברך את כל אנשי מכון טריאסט-שריג לדורותיו, שרבים מהם נמצאים כאן, בהרבה מזל טוב, ולאחל לכם עוד הרבה שנים של פעילות מבורכת, כדי שאולי פתאום ככה משום מקום נחגוג יום הולדת נגיד 47. אני חושב יוסי, אירית, אייל וכל הצוות שבגלל שאתם כל כך עסוקים, אתם בטח לא ממש מתפנים לקלוט איזה דבר אדיר יצרתם, איזה תרומה משמעותית תרמתם לתחום הפסיכותרפיה בארץ ובאופן אישי לכל כך הרבה אנשים. זו גם הזדמנות עבורי יוסי ואירית להודות לכם באופן אישי ואינטימי על מה שנתתם לי. הכרתי את המכון שנה אחרי הקמתו, הייתי אז בעל של מתמחה צעירה בפסיכולוגיה קלינית שהייתה בין המתמחים הראשונים במכון. לא כל כך הכרתי אז את הסכום הזה של הפסיכולוגים ואני לא יודע למה זה בדיוק קשור, אבל כבר אז חשתי שמדובר במשהו רציני בזכות גדולה. זה לא היה ממש פשוט מה שעברתם שם, אבל אני בטוח שיצא טוב. בדיעבד, אני חושב שאולי הייתה צריכה לקום אז קבוצת תמיכה לבני הזוג של המתמחים שלכם. סקרנתם אותי מאוד, ולימים כפסיכיאטר צעיר עם תשוקה גדולה לפסיכואנליזה, באתי אליכם כדי ללמוד פסיכותרפיה, הצטרפתי לצוות המכון, הקמנו יחד יחידה לטיפול בהפרעות חרדה ודיכאון, וחלקנו עוד פרויקטים. לקחתי חלק בישיבות הצוות, בלמידה, בהדרכות, וזכיתי לפגוש עשייה קלינית משובחת, רצינית, יצירתית, מלאת שמחת חיים, ואנשים מקסימים שעם רובם אני בקשרים אישיים ומקצועיים עד היום. אז על כל זה תודה. עבור פרופסור קרנברג ועבור מי שנמצא כאן ולא מכיר, אני רוצה לספר בכמה מילים קצרות על מרכז ויניקוט בישראל, שיחגוג באפריל הקרוב בזמן כנס גדול עשור לקיומו. במרכז לומדים בכל שנה 200 תלמידים במגוון תוכניות. התוכנית הראשונה שהוקמה במרכז היא תוכנית ללימודים מתקדמים בפסיכותרפיה, ברוח החשיבה הויניקוטיאנית ועצמאית בפסיכואנליזה, והיא מתמקדת בלמידה מעמיקה של החשיבה של ויניקוט והקבוצה העצמאית בפסיכואנליזה. לפני מספר שנים הוקמה תוכנית נוספת, תוכנית בת 3.5 שנים, ללימודי תעודה בפסיכותרפיה פסיכואנליטית למטפלים באומנויות והבעה. תוכנית ייחודית בתחום, יחידה מסוגה מוכרת על ידי האיגוד הישראלי לפסיכותרפיה והאגודה הישראלית לפסיכותרפיה פסיכואנליטית, נאמנה לתפיסה הרואה את ייחודיותו של הטיפול בהבעה ויצירה ואת תרומתו הגדולה לטיפול במגוון של מטופלים, ושוקדת על חיפוש דיאלוג בינו לבין הפסיכואנליזה. תוכנית מפת דרכים, התוכנית שמארחת את הכנס היום, בית ספר תלת שנתי ללימודי בסיס בפסיכותרפיה פסיכואנליטית של מרכז ויניקוט בישראל, נוסדה לפני 4 שנים, מיועדת לפסיכולוגים, עובדים סוציאליים ופסיכיאטרים. כשמה, בתוכנית נלמדים באופן שיטתי הזרמים המרכזיים בפסיכואנליזה, ומטרתה להעשיר ולהעמיק בעיקר את העבודה הקלינית של תלמידיה. במסגרת הלימודים יש גם תוכנית של לימודי המשך שמיועדת לבוגרי תוכנית המתקדמים. מתקיימים שם קורסי העמקה על ויניקוט, קורס דו-שנתי על ביון בהנחייתו של אבנר ברגשטיין, וקורס דו-שנתי על שעטנז, שזאת מפגש עם במה רב-תחומית בהנחייתה של חגית אהרוני. מנהלי המרכז וממייסדה ומיכל ריק ואני הפועלים יחד עם צוות היגוי שחברים בו, בנוסף לשנינו, פרופסור עמנואל ברמן, חיות הגורביץ' ושרה קולקר. זאת גם הזדמנות לומר תודה גדולה לחברים, ל-60 מורים, שרובם הגדול אנליטיקאים השייכים לחברה הפסיכואנליטית בישראל. אני גם רוצה להודות לאייל קומורניק, שעד עכשיו אין לי שום מושג למה הוא התקשר דווקא אליי, והציע לנו את השותפות באירוע המרגש הזה, לבועז, שכלום לא היה קורה היום, לולא הקשר החם שלו עם קרנברג, ולולא הוא עצמו היה יוזם את העניין, חמוש בידיעה ברורה שצריך לעשות את זה, ואפילו בכיף. תודה לפרופסור בלאס, לרותי בן אפרת שהעיזה, ולתמי ניר על הרוח הגבית בהדרכה. נשאלנו לא מעט מה למרכז ויניקוט וקרנברג. הם כל כך שונים. זה נכון, יש הבדלים, אבל דווקא זה ריתק אותנו, הדיאלוג עם השוני. הוא חלק מרוח המרכז, והוא קשור גם לכך שלכולנו יש הערכה רבה והכרת תודה לכל הגישות בפסיכואנליזה, על התרומות הייחודיות שלהן, ועל כך שיש כל הזמן רק עוד ועוד מה ללמוד מהן. עם ההכנות למפגש שהצריכו למידה יותר לעומק, נפרס בפנינו עולמו העצום והמרתק של קרנברג, ופגשנו לא מעט נקודות משיקות, מסקרנות, בין קרנברג וויניקוט, שני אנליטיקאים השייכים לזרם יחסי אובייקט, שבסיסו תיאוריות שצמחו מתוך מפגש מאתגר, מורכב, עם מטופלים בעלי ארגון אישיות גבולי. נדמה לי שזה לא מספיק ידוע ומודגש שתרומותיו המרכזיות של ויניקוט לתיאוריה ולתיאוריה של הטכניקה בפסיכואנליזה צמחו מתוך מה שהוא קרא להן אנליזות ניסיוניות, שהיו כולן אנליזות עם מטופלים בעלי ארגון אישיות גבולי. הם, קרנברג וויניקוט, מתחברים ומתפצלים במחשבת הרגרסיה וחולקים באופן ברור את ההתייחסות למה שמתעורר במפגש הטיפולי, בשעה עצמה, בכאן ועכשיו החווייתי, מתייחסים לכך כאל הדרך היחידה לפגוש, להכיר ולדעת משהו על אופיים של תצורות היחס הראשיתיות, הנסתרות מהעין והשפה. שניהם מאמינים גדולים ביכולתה של הפסיכואנליזה לסייע למגוון רחב של מטופלים ובתפקידה המרכזי בתחום בריאות הנפש. כולנו שנמצאים כאן קמים כל בוקר לעמל יומנו, מצוידים באמונה הזאת, ניזונים ממנה ומזינים אותה. רק בגלל זה אני חושב שמגיע לנו ליהנות מערב מיוחד, ממפגש נדיר עם פרופסור קרנברג, אופטימיסט גדול, כפי שהעיד על עצמו אתמול, בהרצאה שנשא בחברה הישראלית לפסיכואנליזה, מאמין גדול שתרומתו לכולנו אדירה. תודה.
אני אציג בקצרה את פרופסור בלאס, שתוביל את הסשן שדוקטור קרנברג ירצה בו. I read it in English. Bלאס is a training analyst at the Israel Psychoanalytic Society, a member of the British Psychoanalytic Society, professor of psychoanalysis at the University of London, and formerly a professor at the Hebrew University, where she also headed the clinical psychology program. She is among the editors of the International Journal of Psychoanalysis and heads its controversies section. She is also active in the International Psychoanalytic Association and has served on its committees. Her writing and research, published in over 80 articles and translated into 15 languages, comes from a London Kleinian perspective grounded in Freud's thinking. In her work, Rachel elucidates what's unique to the traditional psychoanalytic understanding of the person and of the therapeutic process, and argues for the validity and value of these perspectives, especially in the face of contemporary challenges. Rachel teaches, lectures, and supervises extensively both in Israel and in many countries abroad. Having lived 8 years in London, where she became actively part of the Kleinian group there and received ongoing supervision from people like Hannah Segal, Betty Joseph, and John Steiner, she has returned a couple of years ago to live and practice in Jerusalem. Rachel, please.
I've been asked to chair this session and again introduce Dr. Kernberg. And as Yossi Trieste already said, Dr. Kernberg doesn't need an introduction. And we could just move on to the lecture. But I think for us, it's worthwhile to take a moment and think about Dr. Kernberg's work and to introduce it. Also, in order to express our appreciation for his very extensive contribution to our field and his important achievements. But also, it gives us a moment to reflect on the importance of Dr. Kernberg to us, the importance of his writings as well as his visiting with us today. So I'll just briefly comment on your work. Dr. Kernberg has been professor of psychiatry at the Cornell University Medical School in New York, director of the Cornell Institute, director at Cornell of the Institute for Personality Disorders. He's a training and supervising analyst at Columbia University Center for Psychoanalytic Training and Research. He has held over the years many major academic, clinical, research, and organizational positions in psychiatry and psychoanalysis, director of the Manager Memorial Hospital, director of the Psychotherapy Research Project of the Manager Foundation, medical director of the New York Hospital, Cornell Medical Center at Westchester Division, and as many of us know, between 1997 and 2001, he was the president of the International Psychoanalytical Association. He's published 13 books, co-authored 12 others, and written countless articles. He's received so many awards and contributions, both in psychiatry and psychoanalysis. To us, I think, as to many around the world, he's known through his writings. Over the years, we've read his texts on borderline conditions and pathological narcissism. We studied his characterization of borderline patients and the possibilities of their dynamic treatment. We followed his objections to Kohut's views of narcissism as they were evolving into self-psychology. And we studied his thinking on development, normal and pathological, that stood at the foundation of his ideas. Here, he brought together and integrated concepts from various schools of object relations and ego psychology, terms associated with Kleinian thinking, such as projective identification and splitting, drive theory, and views of representation, in part grounded in cognitive approaches of various kinds. Dr. Kernberg offered us very clearly structured models with which to interview, diagnose, understand, and treat, which he presented as based on clinical experience, analytic thinking, and empirical research, in part neuroscientific findings as well. He has worked continuously to further refine his models and the treatments based on them, and his transference-focused psychotherapy, TFP, has emerged in this context. I think that while some who have come here today do so because they have adopted all or many of Dr. Kernberg's ideas and models and approaches to treatment, and they'd like to hear some of the latest updates on what's been developing in his thinking, I think many others come because despite differences, there's a deep appreciation that we've all been influenced by Dr. Kernberg's thinking. His efforts to think about severe pathology, its different forms, its grounds and treatments, the possibilities and limits of analytic interpretation, the relationships between different analytic schools and concepts, the role of narcissism in the person's development, have all become integral to our analytic thinking. The questions he's asked, his call for clarity, his awareness of the need to better ground our ideas and practices are part and parcel of contemporary psychoanalysis. Moreover, his devoted dialogue with so many analytic schools of thought, although actually in his integration of them, he actually offers an approach that differs from them all, it's a unique approach, allows us ultimately to identify psychoanalysis with Dr. Kernberg. And I think that this is part of the special pleasure and sense of privilege that this audience has in meeting with you here today. It's part of a desire, perhaps a kind of longing, to meet psychoanalysis in its most live form, to have our familiar analytic texts which have shaped us over the years, speak to us directly, to come alive. This evening, Dr. Kernberg will speak to us on the topic of some of his thoughts about psychoanalysis today. And I'm sure it will arouse thoughts and questions, including challenging ones. And I don't think you're afraid of conflict. No. And that the audience will have the opportunity and feel free to engage Dr. Kernberg in a critical discussion of his ideas.
First of all, can you hear me well in the last row? Is this working? Okay. Please indicate if the sound fails or you can't hear me, because I wouldn't be able to tell unless you let me know. It's a great pleasure and a great honor to be here. I'm impressed by this enormous audience, a little intimidated, and I'm very grateful for the very kind introductions I've had, and I want to reaffirm what Professor Bלאס just said, what Professor Bלאס just said in terms of my being very open to critical thoughts and hoping that people don't just agree easily. I have been asked to do something unusual, just to talk freely about where I stand regarding psychoanalysis and psychoanalytic issues today, a kind of free pass to speak about what I think without entering in justification and discussion and explanation, just give you an overview, and I will try to do that in the course of an hour, touching a number of subjects. A major difficulty is that I don't know you, where you are, where you come from, and so I run the risk of perhaps saying some things that are obvious to everybody and other things that seem strange because it's a kind of problem you are not dealing with. So bear with me. Hopefully in the middle of this I will be able to communicate issues that are relevant to your own thinking, to your own views regarding where the field of psychoanalysis, psychoanalytic theory, psychoanalytic psychotherapy, relation between psychoanalysis and psychiatry, psychoanalytic education, problems of psychoanalytic organizations, etc., where you stand regarding some or all of these issues. So with this note of caution and explanation, I start. First of all, some of my views regarding psychoanalytic theory today. Perhaps the most important issue in which I feel there is a need for a radical change has to do with psychoanalytic drive theory. Freud formulated several drive theories, the final one about libido and the death drive, dual drive system that has love in all its forms, and their life affirmation on the one hand, and aggression in all its form, and search for destruction and death on the other, as the two major drives, the conflicts of which are central in human conflict, human life, and are at the bottom of significant aspects of psychopathology, of the neurosis and the character pathology, even of the psychosis, at least to some degree. It seems to me that that theory has to be modified significantly in the light of contemporary neurobiology. Freud started out as a neurologist. He had an exquisite knowledge of the neurology of his time, but we are talking about the neurology of 1900 or 1910 or 1920. We are miles further, and we now know today that the basic motivational systems that operate from birth on are really affect systems, that affects are neurobiological functions that are genetically determined, constitutionally given, that are expressed by means of specific areas of the brain in the limbic system and specific neurotransmitters, of which we know about 20, but there are probably many more, and we are just advancing in that field. And that affects are complex packages of subjective experience, a specific facial expression, associated psychomotor movement, neurovegetative discharge, and have a cognitive component in that when affects get activated, there's an increase of cortical functions, attention, and a perception of the external environment that surrounds the experience of the affect. Affects have a subjective experience, either positive of pleasure or negative of pain, affiliative or aversive. And contemporary affect theory, as it has developed particularly in the pioneering work of Jaak Panksepp, has permitted us now to have a full knowledge of the basic affect system, each of them composed of several affects, and they jointly constitute part of the temperament. Temperament is the general reactivity of the organism, cognitive reactivity, affective reactivity, behavioral reactivity, but the most important one is the affective one that starts from birth. The affective systems that we know are on the positive side, attachment. I'm sure you are familiar with all the research going on in that area. Erotism, that was studied psychoanalytically, but that has very few studies neurobiologically because of the puritanical aspects of society that inhibits and is allergic to invest research in erotism. So we are still in the era of Freud in that regard. Attachment, erotism, and play bonding, meaning the general affiliation with other members, the playful search for contacts with other members of the social group. And all of these are positive affect systems. And if we think of libido, libido is really a combination of these three major systems. of attachment, of erotism, of play bonding. The negative affect systems are fight-flight, fight with all the attack, defensive attack against what seems to be harmful or dangerous. Flight, the mechanism that permit us to escape from dangerous situation. They are really the basic aspects of aggression and the most important negative affect system, in addition to separation panic. Separation panic is an independent system of extreme affective reaction to basic dangers to survival. When life seems to be threatened, separation panic is activated, and very often it's connected with attachment, in the sense when attachment fails in severe, insecure attachment, then separation panic operates in the baby, but it's not the same system, but it's one primary activation of this extreme danger to life that later on during life emerges under conditions of extreme danger to survival, earthquake, major catastrophes that affect one's existence. And when Freud talks about the death drive, he is really talking about the combined effects of these two negative affect systems. There exists still one more affect system which is neither positive nor negative, but it's a general alerting one, an affect system which is a seeking system, looking for general stimulation in the environment that can be attached to positive or negative other affect systems according to the experience of the individual. But the most important issue that I'm stressing is that affect systems are the basic motivational systems that in their combined effects come to constitute what Freud called the drives. So the drives are hierarchically superordinate integration of respectively positive and negative affect systems. And Freud, it seems to me, were absolutely right that clinically unconscious conflicts are basically conflicts between this combined effect of positive and negative affect system, between libido and aggression. Of course, so that clinically libido and aggression shows again as affects plus object relations, the next point to which I'm coming. But the importance is that then the theory of drives needs to be revised fundamentally in the light of present-day neurobiological knowledge. It seems to me that psychoanalysis cannot escape and has to look into its relation to neurobiology and in general to that of other sciences at the periphery. No science can exist in isolation. And the usual rationalization of psychoanalysis as being so unique, each psychoanalytic experience is a unique experience that can't be compared scientifically with anything else, is just a lazy excuse from an organization that is allergic to research for specific reasons to which I come back. Now, my second point is that contemporary theory from all currents, well, perhaps excluding the Lacanian ones, but all other currents have shifted into an object relations theory perspective. And the essential aspects of object relations theory is going back to what I said about affects, is that affects get activated in the relation between baby and mother. And affects have two fundamental functions. One, to indicate to oneself how one feels, and the other is to indicate to others how one feels. They have a communicative function, and mother has inborn capacity to read the communicative function of her baby that can't tell mother, excuse me, dear mother, but it is time for a feeding. I'm very hungry, and this situation is really impossible to tolerate. The baby, a week-old baby, can't say that, but it can cry desperately, and mother knows time for a feeding. So that the communicative function of affect initiates interaction, positive with positive affects, negative with negative affects. Negative affects may bring about gratification that changes the situation into a positive one. But in any case, affects activate relationship between ourselves and mother, between ourselves and others in general, and that creates an experience of a relation between self and other under the control of a dominant affect, and that experience is internalized as affective memory, centered particularly in the hippocampus. Freud thought that affects were discharge phenomena because that's what neurobiology thought in its time. Now we know that affects can be stored and become psychic structures based on neurobiological developments, so that we have dyadic units of representations of self, representation of other, and the affect linking them, that accumulate thousands of them of initially very positive or very negative type, developing an idealized and a persecutory segment of experience. So internalized object relations organize psychological experience and create a psychological structure in contrast to the underlying neurobiological structures that are expressed by affects. So we function on the basic neurobiological structures that then give origin to purely psychological structures. And behavior is really co-determined by neurobiology modified by intrapsychic psychological structures. And the most important is, first of all, the building of these two worlds of idealized and persecutory internal representation of the world that at the same time indicate our experience, what happens with other, expressed in habitual behavior pattern that we call character, so that temperament leads to interaction, interaction leads to the internalization of object relations that lead to habitual behavior patterns that are character, but intrapsychically, all the self components of these dyadic relation between self and others organize into an organized self that ends up surrounded by integrated, organized representations of significant others. And what classical theory has called superego, ego, and id are really the supraordinate integrations of these internalized object relations, the ego centered around that concept of the self and of significant others, the superego constituted by the demand and prohibition aspects of interaction with significant others that gradually evolve into an internalized conscious as well as unconscious ethical system, and gradually the capacity to eliminate from consciousness the intolerable extreme internalized object relation of an aggressive and sexual nature that can't be tolerated, give rise to the unconscious id. And I think that the contemporary ideas that the id is originally conscious affective experience and that the unconsciousness of the id is a later development is a very reasonable integration of neurobiology and psychoanalysis that, of course, runs counter of what Freud thought originally. And one problem that we have is that psychoanalysis has not yet integrated really consistently these early developmental features with the later development of the mind, a general problem of all psychoanalytic theories that has relevance for psychoanalytic technique. And one of the problems that psychoanalysis has is that the technique of psychoanalysis has not systematically integrated object relations theory, which is true even for the most sophisticated psychoanalytic schools. I'm talking about, to some extent, Fairbairn, but mostly the school of Melanie Klein, who, of course, has revolutionarily discovered that primitive splitting into idealized and persecutory segment of experience, primitive internalized object relations, and their relevance for serious psychopathology. But not even the Kleinian school has an integrated concept of development as well as pathology that makes use fully of object relations theory. I think that's a task for psychoanalysis we are being involved in. And it practically means that when we talk about the structural theory, ego, superego, and id, we have to talk very importantly about integrated versus non-integrated self and representation of significant others. In other words, ego identity, concepts of self and identity have not been incorporated sufficiently in an integrated general concept, it seems to me. I think that Freud's assumption of unconscious conflicts between love and hatred as the essence of the unconscious conflicts of human beings stands as before. And most psychoanalytic schools tend to accept that, except the relational school that has serious problems in their motivational assumptions, both theoretically and technically. I'll come back to that. The discussion about the centrality of the Oedipal conflict, I think that is no longer a major problematic issue in the sense that, in contrast to the linear development, pre-Oedipal stages and then Oedipals, oral, anal, Oedipal, we now think of very early stages characterized by the splitting between idealized and persecutory experiences in which already oral and anal and Oedipal issues are involved very early. Melanie Klein had a point in contrast to Freud's assumption that things happened later. And French analysts, and this has been a contribution of, indirect contribution of the Lacanian school, have started to think of archaic Oedipal issues, and the difference between severe psychopathology and normality is the extent to which advanced Oedipal conflicts in contrast to very primitive ones, and the most primitive problems of the transformation of dyadic relationship into triadic one takes place or is interfered with. But this is a minor problem. A major problem of psychoanalytic schools nowadays that, in a strange way, this basic concept of conflict between libido and aggression is difficult to tolerate. We can group psychoanalytic schools into those into, say, the Kleinian approach that focuses sharply on aggression, but that only in more later times has begun to incorporate more systematically complex Oedipal problems, such as in the perversions. The French analytic school that has accentuated erotism, but has not given for a long time due attention to primitive aggression. The relational school that has insisted in what may be predominantly the attachment issues of libidinal investment, focuses on problems of normal and faulty dependency, but clearly has had difficulty fully integrating primitive aggression and primitive sexuality. The relational school is seductive because that insistence on dependency has a kind of a common sense approach that is seductive for therapists, but depth of analytic understanding of primitive aggression and sexuality are missed. My point is that it is difficult for a psychoanalytic school to incorporate fully Freud's findings about aggression, primitive sexuality, and primitive dependency in an integrated view of conflicts between love and aggression. And this leads to my stand regarding the position of the psychoanalytic schools. To put it very simply, as you already have heard, I've tried to bring together in a not ecumenical way, but logically and functionally integrated way, findings of ego psychology, British independence, Kleinian school, French school. I have had great difficulty with Lacanian psychoanalysis because Lacan uses the same word for different meanings. There is a lack of I hate using the term, of an intellectual integrity in this playing with words. It's evocative, but it doesn't have the clarity on which you can rely if you are trying to develop scientific understanding. So I am closest to the Kleinian school that has permitted to understanding the deepest levels of aggression and its influence on human psychology. Of course, Melanie Klein accepted Freud's death drive without thinking of the biology behind, but in practice, the clinical understanding of the Kleinian school has the kind of depth that I think analysis deserves, and to quite an extent that has been influencing the British Independent, where that to some extent has been missing, although they have accepted and incorporated Melanie Klein's findings regarding primitive object relations and defenses. Classical ego psychology that insisted on adaptation and malfunctioning in daily life has weakened enormously. Some ego psychologists have blown it up from the inside. But what has remained is a new generation of ego psychologists who are interested in maintaining analysis of character and study of defensive operations of the higher level, more typical for neurotic rather than borderline structures, and who have begun to incorporate Kleinian concepts. I'm talking about Fred Bush and Gray. So there are technical aspects of ego psychology in terms of systematic analysis of character that are useful, helpful, and if they are added to a basic Kleinian approach, I think gives us a basis for what I consider a psychoanalytic mainstream, basically Kleinian, but with enrichment by findings both from the independent and the ego-psychological group, and from the non-Lacanian French who have introduced the emphasis on sexuality, as I said. I am particularly impressed by the contributions of the second generation of Kleinian authors, Rosenfeld, Britton, and Betty Joseph, who I think clinically is and represents an optimal approach to psychoanalytic technique. I am critical of, on the other hand, of the Neo-Bionians, particularly the Italian school, Ferro, City Varese, because I think, I don't know whether I'm talking now about something that may not be of interest to important parts of the audience.
That's what they're most interested in.
Oh. Because in the United States there's little interest in this. I think it is an important issue. Bion has had fundamental contributions to study severe psychopathology. He had not the slightest interest in psychiatric diagnosis, differential psychopathology. He was a quite schizoid individual himself, living in his own world, but he had fundamental understanding of primitive defensive operations. I won't summarize his work, but toward the end of his life, he paid attention to what he called awake dreaming. He didn't define it very clearly, but it is safe to think that he talked about daydreaming as a representative of dreaming activity with a reduction with ordinary conscious control, superego control, and on that basis Ogden and Ferro and City Varese and the entire school, particularly Italian school, developed a technique that already the French had been initiating of using the manifest content of free association as if it were manifest content of a dream to which the analyst associates in his own mind, uses the countertransference to evoke his own fantasies. In other words, the analyst daydreams on the basis of what the patient informs. That's all treated as daydreaming, not differentiating reflection of reality from the utilization of that reality for giving rise to deeper content and free association. So analysts associate on patients' associations, develop narratives to which then patients develop narratives, and the whole analytic situation becomes an arbitrary fantasy, kind of a mad country that if you read some recent sessions, for example, published by Ogden, I think you have a sense, if that's going to be psychoanalysis, goodbye to our survival in this world. So I'm giving you now let me tell you that I personally respect highly Ferro and City Varese's clinicians. They are highly skilled and intuitive people who have a tremendous sense for patients, but the transformation of that personal sense in a general theory of functioning that neglects reality, that neglects character, and that ends up in a land in which counter-transference becomes a narrative and patients' narratives are interpreted and immediately reality is neglected, seems to me highly problematic. And I have the impression that the London psychoanalysts, the London Kleinians, think like me, although they don't say so publicly. And I have one sitting next to me, so this is a reality test.
I say so publicly. Huh? I say so publicly.
The same thing that I'm saying? Oh,
yes,
that's interesting.
I didn't know we shared so many views.
Okay, yeah, okay. I think that my major, so I think there's a psychoanalytic mainstream with Kleinians, independence, ego psychology, what is left of it, and contemporary French. And among the French analysts, I want to underline particularly the revolutionary work of André Green, whose knowledge of severe psychopathology has helped him to alert the French to some of the problems with their technique. I'm not going into detail here at this point. But so I consider that as a mainstream, and I'm critical of the relationists, the relational school, which is strong in the United States. 50% of analysts are relational analysts. It's developing in Europe, particularly, I think, Southern Europe, and of course under the influence of the Italian school. They have insisted in the importance of trauma, the importance of deficits of development, the function of therapy to complement unfilled areas of development, and combined that with anti-authoritarian, democratizing attitude in which the analyst shouldn't be in a position of authoritarian dictate reality, but should be more on an equality and the theory of intersubjectivity, in which transference depends on countertransference as well as countertransference on transference, and analysts communicate countertransference, fosters a friendly attitude that permits the patient to identify with his therapist or his analyst, but at the cost of preventing deepening of analysis of the transference, avoiding that the deepest levels of transference dealing with primitive aggression and sexuality come out in the open. And it is no coincidence that the patient material of relationalist analysts are all much healthier than the patients that those of us who work in hospitals and are willing to see the sickest kind of patients are studying. And so I don't have time to give the reasons for this position of mine, but one has to differentiate post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a direct consequence of stress, from the effect of trauma on the development of pathological structures. Once there are pathological personality structures, you have to study in depth the personality, even though the trauma has been etiologically important. The technique is totally different. And by the way, in my institute, we have studied in great detail the difference of technical approach to PTSD and to patients with severe traumatic elements influencing distortion of the personality. The erasing of this difference is a major problem in psychiatry and unfortunately also in the relational school in psychoanalysis. Now, that's what I wanted to say about where I stand regarding theory, regarding technique. I direct an institute for personality disorders in which we are studying psychoanalytic technique in great detail to define clearly different technical interventions. We have spent years on this, and we have come to the conclusion that there are 4 basic psychoanalytic techniques from which all others derive, that are interpretation, transference analysis, technical neutrality, and countertransference utilization. We have defined each of these techniques using material from all different kind of schools. The importance of, and when you talk about other psychoanalytic techniques, character analysis, dream analysis, negative therapeutic reaction, acting out, working through, repetition, compulsion, termination, analysis of the psychoanalytic field, all these are specific areas in which you use these 4 methods. And here, the interest has been for us that specifying this technique as used in standard psychoanalysis also permits to specify modification of them, the combination of which characterize derived psychoanalytic psychotherapies that are effective in cases that cannot be psychoanalyzed, the most severe kind of psychopathology where psychoanalysis fails, and it is possible to define, in fact, all existing psychoanalytic psychotherapies in terms of modification of these 4 variables. To this come, of course, the supportive techniques. Indeed, we have a list, and there are therapists that add supportive techniques, sometimes to the detriment of psychoanalytic approaches. At other times, a purely supportive technique may just what is needed. The lightest cases, the very mild ones, may do very well with a supportive psychotherapy of limited time. And the most severe cases who tend to destroy any deep relationship may do better with a supportive psychotherapy at the bottom of the scale. So support is at the limits of the whole field. And in between are the psychoanalytic psychotherapists, and including psychoanalysis. And now I come to 2 important viewpoints I have. One, that psychoanalytic technique is taught horribly in psychoanalytic institutes. They teach badly, and that behind this is a mystification of psychoanalytic technique. It is a shame, it's a scandal that there doesn't exist a single text on psychoanalytic technique after all these years, 90 years of organized psychoanalytic education. And there is not a single textbook on psychoanalytic technique. Of course, there's the Kleinian technique and the relational technique and the Lacanian technique and the ego-psychological technique and the Bionian technique, and all of it with a restricted field, but there is no honest integration, and integration not only in a complete list, so to speak, but how they relate to each other. And what we have, and the way psychoanalytic techniques are taught in psychoanalytic institutes is totally chaotic in all of them. And the result is that candidates feel they never know exactly what they depend on the supervisor. The supervisors, they know, and the candidates go to the supervisors who tell them what they should do, but the supervisors don't have an integrated concept either. So they tell their own experience, and so the candidates learn the way supervisors work, but the question is not resolved. And of course, the supervisors also feel that the ultimate knowledge is in their supervisors, and so there are levels of supervisor, and at the top is Freud in the sky, and we trust Freud knew it. Freud knew it all. So there is hope. Behind this is a serious problem in psychoanalytic education, to which I will come back. But that I seriously believe, and I'm talking on the basis of 30 years of experience of directing an institute just dedicated to study psychoanalysis and psychotherapy, that psychoanalytic technique can be specified, can be clarified, and that it can be modified for specific derived psychotherapies that have specific indication, and that therefore the so-called standard psychoanalytic technique is just one way, a central way that permitted the discovery of all the rest, but one way of applying psychoanalytic technique, and there exist others, and that from this viewpoint we should be teaching all these others because they are intimately linked. The theory behind it, the technique, the learning about it, how to treat patients. And psychoanalytic institutes would rather commit suicide than teach psychoanalytic psychotherapy, with rare exception. There are now a number of psychoanalytic institutes that teach psychoanalytic psychotherapy as well as standard or classical psychoanalysis, but it's a minority. Many of them, the large majority, are horrified by that and are afraid if you teach those other things, psychoanalysis will be diluted, psychoanalytic identity will be lost. There are all kinds of fantasies in this regard, and behind this there are unconscious motivational systems. So I see standard psychoanalysis as one very important central technique with specific indications and contraindications, and psychoanalytic psychotherapies as a developing field that all taken together should permit psychoanalytic theory to be available for a large segment of the population and have really a social impact that is being lost if you think that the only thing you're doing is the standard psychoanalysis and nothing else, which in addition is very high frequency, is expensive, is socially being questioned, not to speak about many other treatments that are effective and with which psychoanalysis has to compete in the area of cognitive behavior therapies, in the area of psychopharmacology. I'm not saying anything new. Now, I'm going, so consequence, I'm going to education. By the way, what time is it?
We have 15 minutes, and perhaps you'd like to leave a little time for questions if that's possible.
Yeah, so I'll try in 15 minutes to say the rest of that.
Okay, but yeah. I should say it's a mixture of therapists and psychoanalysts.
Yeah.
So
Okay, then let me.
Okay.
Clinically, what I have said in terms of education shows as the lack of systematic teaching of technique, the lack of systematic application of object relations theory, the lack of application of psychoanalytic theory and technique to other forms of psychotherapy, and the lack of a real comparative critical attitude toward other psychoanalytic orientation than the one that an institute has. There are all these different schools, and instead of carrying out research to find out who's right, there is with the allergy against research, the decision is let's be good friends. There's an ecumenical attitude in the congresses. Everybody presents their position. They have nothing to do with each other, but the people are friends and they have coffee together, and everybody lives happily, leaving this serious contradiction that threaten the entire field because of the unresolved major contradictions in the field. Now, education. I'll try to put this in 15 minutes. The main problem with psychoanalytic institutions is the total ignorance of contemporary educational principles. I talked about that last night, and I apologize to those who were there last night if they have to hear this again. But I'm going to say perhaps something obvious. Modern, contemporary educational principles are based upon the fact that if you want to educate a group of people, you have to have first objectives. What do you want to teach? What exactly is it that you want to teach, and what your graduates should know and be able to do? That's essential. Has never done in psychoanalysis. Then you have to have methods by which you are going to teach so that your students learn what your objectives are. And this means a program in which year after year you know exactly how to increase what is being taught in a meaningful sequence and related sequence. Third, you have to have methods that evaluate whether what you're teaching is being learned, evaluation of what you're doing, step by step. And fourth, you have to find out whether those instruments that you have really are correlated with the final product. Psychoanalytic institutes have never done that. What is being taught depends upon the ideology of the institute. There is no clear evaluation of progress. These candidates do not know exactly what they have to know so to be sure that they can graduate. There's an atmosphere of uncertainty, and they depend on whether the supervisors think they're all right, whether the seminar leaders think all right, except that it is not clear. There's no objective thing that everybody knows. Once I know that, I don't need to be worried. I know it and I'll graduate. That's the major problem. Behind it, the major reason, the training analysis system. I think training analysis system was initially a great way in which analysis starting decided that we'll take the best analysts and we'll ask them to form a newer analyst. They know the things the best, they should do it. That was reasonable. But over the years, it has been transformed in an arbitrary selection of those who we think that they are good enough to treat candidates, which means that the others who are not training analysts are not good enough. In other words, it has created a hierarchy of the good enoughs in a system that we suspect does not train people good enough, so by the time all graduate are at the level they should be. I always use the metaphor of cardiology. Imagine we train cardiologists, and then we decided there are some cardiologists, these are the good ones, and we call them training cardiologists. And from now on, only the training cardiologists can really train and treat patients. And the elite that can afford a training cardiologist goes to a training cardiologist. The rest of the public goes to the ordinary cardiologists who are not so good. This is what we do with our training analysis system. It's a consequence of the insecurity and our awareness of the insufficiency of training. And the training analysts then, because of their relationship to their candidates, are idealized. They are the best of the profession. That idealization is never resolved. It brings about splitting between idealization and evaluation. Training analysts are training analysts and supervising analysts. They are supposed to be the supervisors and seminar leaders, and they know, of course, administrative organization, and so they are best leaders of institutions. They have all the skills. all of it selected intuitively because there are no objective standards for anything, and they become a class that is interested in maintaining the power structure. In countries where there are few patients in analysis, the training analysts have all the candidates they need. It's the non-training analysts who don't have enough patients. Sometimes this reaches caricatures. It's almost like a monopoly of a small group that avoids the development of competition. I'm simplifying in a few words something about which I could talk many hours, and there are many people who have talked about it. I think it's time to end the training analysis system, and there are ways to assure an education by which all graduates have an acceptable level, and after a period of 3-5 years, all of them can be eligible to train candidates without the competition and mutual envy that exists nowadays. And by the way, it was a very pleasant experience to learn that the Israel Psychoanalytic Society has abolished the training analysis system, as far as I learned last night. And from this viewpoint, it's one of the progressive minority that is developing. You have some...
There still are
maybe,
training analysts,
okay, yeah.
but you don't. Okay. There's still a training.
Am I wrong?
There's still a training analyst, but it's a very democratic way of becoming a training analyst, I would say.
By the way, I'm opposed to democratic ways. This is an important point I want to make. I'll have only dropped one shoe. Let me drop the other one. To abolish the training analysis system is not enough. That by itself doesn't solve the issue. You have to have the educational principles that I enunciated, and you have to have an education that is clear, sharp, makes the demands that are necessary to reach the objectives that you have. So you have to improve your teaching and make it sharp and precise. It's not enough to abolish the training analysis system. So there is a need for important changes in educational system all along, and that requires knowledge. And the people who make the decisions about these educational principles should be those who have specific knowledge. And so that the decisions should be made on a functional basis. Those who have the knowledge are those in charge to make the decision. Democracy is a decision made by all. Everybody has the same rights. Democracy is a wonderful system for communities and for societies, but for specific educational institutions, you need to make functional decisions, not democratic one. And you have to differentiate functional decisions from authoritarian one, in which you use your knowledge to impose arbitrary things. For example, one law that yesterday I was reminded of, candidates who are at an institute have to be in analysis throughout their entire analytic training. This is one of these crazy arbitrary decisions that permits to keep the candidates under control. So I am not for democracy, but for functional decision-making education as part of a contemporary educational structure, and of course against an authoritarian system.
May I throw in a question?
Yes.
At this point, or is there another point you want to get to?
No, I think I have a list of the consequences of the present system. Let me just read it down, and I will not talk about problems of organization. I was going to talk about administrative.
There's only a small group of analysts among us.
Okay.
So
I'm leaving out. So what we have right now is a consequence of this hierarchical power structure in psychoanalytic institutions throughout the world. Is authoritarianism, doctrinary inculcation of knowledge instead of scientific findings, a tendency of petrification in terms of theoretical understanding, infantilization of candidates, elitism and isolation from society, an anti-scientific and anti-research attitude, and with a specific distrust of empirical research, and suicidal, maintaining oneself separated from academia and from the university. In conclusion, I would say that the structure of psychoanalytic institution is to a large extent a realistic demonstration of Freud's theory of the death drive.
Thank you very much. I'm sure we could take a couple of minutes for questions. It's been a long and interesting presentation, but perhaps we could just take a few minutes for questions. And I'd like to start with one question. Yes. And I'd be interested to hearing your thinking. Yes. I'm first hearing this lecture now, and what struck me is that many of the audience are very familiar with your integrative approach, where you have ego psychology and Kleinian thinking and neuroscience, and you're taking from many different places and bringing this together into an integration. At the same time, what struck me in your lecture today is that you have a notion of a core of psychoanalysis. Right? And then you say, well, that group went off and left out aggression, and this group are too much into narratives and leave off. So you have a notion of a core of psychoanalysis that incorporates indeed several different approaches, concepts from different approaches, but there is a basic core by which you judge or evaluate the other theories, right? So this is in and this is in. Now, it doesn't seem to me that that's an empirical finding. You're saying this is important. Any theory who throws out aggression isn't psychoanalysis, right? Or that if we have to be able to deal with certain kinds of interpretation as part of the analytic process, and if there aren't depth interpretations of this kind, it's not. And I wondered what guides you, what leads you to form this core of psychoanalysis, and what's the heart of it? It's not an empirical finding that this is the core. No. I mean, in 50 years from now, what psychoanalysis will be may be something very different. So it's not an empirical finding. So what is it? Perhaps you could say, and what defines it? What characterizes it?
Well, I think I mentioned that because I made a point, or maybe I didn't. I think the existence of unconscious intrapsychic conflict, reflecting both libido and aggression as I define it, as a basic source of motivation in health and illness, with all the defensive and adaptive structures around it, is the essential contribution of Freud. And I think it stands throughout all schools and experience. So I see that as a basic, ever-present clinical reality. And when I say unconscious, I'm using the term in a contemporary way, not simply as repressed, but also dissociated, because at primitive structures with predominance of splitting mechanism and related primitive mechanisms, there is consciously contradictory motivation that tears up the individual and that shows in character pathology and all kind of other sexual difficulties. But the conflict is still dynamically unconscious, while at higher level you have repression, and of course it is unconscious in a descriptive way. So I'm using unconsciousness in that level. That seems to me the basic Freudian theory. And that theory seems to me strengthened by the observation of the conflicts of everybody whom you see in a psychodynamic psychotherapy in the broadest sense, trying to find out what is going on in the individual instead of trying to make him behave better, on the one hand, and on the other, in that it fits with your growing knowledge of neurobiology and the transformation of the biological into intrapsychic. The grand tragedy of neurobiology nowadays is that most neurobiologists see, and the psychiatrists who are neurobiologically oriented, look for specific areas of the brain or networks that determine behavior. They go from neurobiology to behavior. And they neglect totally the fact that neurobiology activates affect systems that have both subjective existential qualities and behavioral ones, and that the subjective quality tends to get organized into psychological structures and functions. And psychoanalysis has discovered those functions, and there is empirical evidence for it. There's empirical evidence for projective identification. I'm talking about the work of Rainer Krause in Germany, one of the leading affect experts. So I see that as the basic concept from which is a basic clinical reality, that the justification of this grows from what develops at both poles, and the elements of which can be explored empirically.
I know we have a moment to end, so I'd just like to ask you, in light of all these developments that you've described,
yes,
and the way psychoanalysis is evolving and the alternatives to it, are you hopeful about psychoanalysis?
That's a good question. And it's a continuation of what you asked me before. If I were right in what I see as the fundamental contribution of psychoanalysis, then psychoanalysis has the potential for a theory of the formation of normal personality and abnormal personality, and the possibility of influencing it in terms of modification, and for studying how the psychology of the individual is influenced by what happens in couples, in group, in social entities. Then I see psychoanalysis as a unique, rich personality theory. We have studied the 10 different personality theories from all orientations, and psychoanalysis is by far the richest one with the greatest potential for an integrative study of development, structure, and pathology. And so I think that is of utmost importance scientifically. If the basic sciences of the human beings are neurobiology, intrapsychic structures, and sociology or psychosociology, then we are right in the center of the understanding of the human being. And I think that psychoanalysis provides understanding of what, for example, understandings in terms of group and mass psychology, leadership, that touch it with philosophy and sociology and political theory and organizational theory, that are extremely important. And psychoanalysis has not developed that. A psychoanalytic institute don't give a damn about the people who have developed our knowledge that operates into the area of, say, understanding of political issues. Who teaches Volkan in our institutes? Most candidates have never heard his name. Who teaches Jaak Panksepp? Most psychoanalysts have never heard his name. We have a forced ignorance. When that gets overcome, I think there's a great potential. But it requires practically, it requires that we develop research on what we're doing, that we develop the total research so to contact with the other sciences, that we return to the university, all of which is very difficult, but there are things that you can say about it, that we develop research, psychotherapies, so we have a broad spectrum for treating everybody. I'm exaggerating. And return, so research, psychotherapy, university, and of course an internal structure by which we teach our field in depth, so we get the most intellectually curious people to study that. If we achieve that, I think we can make it. If we don't develop, if we don't get back to the university, we don't develop psychotherapy, or of course it is possible that we push out all the psychoanalytic psychotherapists to psychoanalytic psychotherapy societies. But then what will happen is that the psychoanalytic psychotherapy society will have the same problem that we have, and hopefully will start from a more open position while the psychoanalytic institutes disappear.
Okay, well, I think hearing you today has encouraged us to further explore psychoanalytic thinking, and has shown us, I think, some of the importance of dialogue to enriching the psychoanalytic knowledge and its study, as you've done and been a wonderful example of through all these years. So I'd like to thank Dr. Kernberg for his illuminating talk. We will return again.
Let me just say, I appreciate what you're saying, and I also want to congratulate you, because I think that within the Kleinian School you are doing very important work to clarify more precise Kleinian thinking, and that's just great. There are some disagreement I have with Kleinian orientation, which I would love to discuss with you, but I know that we have to do it on another.
We'll have other opportunities.